Hello and good day. Welcome to our video channel, God's Promises. And today's video will be a fast, concise overview, Book of Job, chapter 35. Let's get started now. Chapter 35 of the Book of Job is part of the ongoing conversation between Job and his three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. In this chapter, Elihu, a younger man who has been silently listening to the discussion, speaks up for the first time to offer his own perspective on the situation. Elihu begins by pointing out that Job has been complaining that God has not been listening to him or answering his prayers, but Elihu believes that God is always just and fair. He argues that it is not God's fault that Job's situation has turned out the way it has. Rather, it is Job's own sins that have caused him to suffer. Elihu then goes on to say that God is too great to be affected by either good or bad behavior on the part of humans, and that God does not owe anyone anything. He suggests that if Job truly understood this, he would be less inclined to complain and more inclined to repent of his sins. The main lesson of this chapter is the importance of humility and accepting responsibility for one's actions. Elihu reminds Job that God is sovereign and just, and that human beings are accountable for their own behavior. Instead of blaming God or others for his suffering, Job must recognize his own faults and seek to make amends. Elihu's speech also emphasizes the idea that God's justice is not always immediately apparent to human beings. Just because someone appears to be suffering unjustly does not necessarily mean that God is unfair or uninvolved. Instead, there may be underlying factors or reasons that humans cannot understand. Ultimately, Elihu's message is one of trust and faith in God's wisdom and justice, even in the midst of difficult and trying circumstances. He encourages Job to turn his attention away from himself and his complaints, and instead to focus on God's greatness and sovereignty. Elihu then continues to challenge Job's understanding of God's justice. He argues that God is too high and too distant for humans to fully understand, and therefore, it is not appropriate for Job to question his justice. Elihu states that God's justice is not based on a person's righteousness, but rather on his own divine wisdom and knowledge. He also suggests that Job's suffering might be a result of his own sin and urges him to repent and turn back to God. In verse 10, Elihu notes that Job has been complaining that he does not receive any benefit from living a righteous life. However, Elihu argues that God's justice is not based on what humans can see or understand. God's ways are higher than human ways, and his justice is perfect, even if it seems unfair to us. Elihu's words are a reminder that our finite minds cannot fully understand God's ways. It is human nature to try to make sense of things, to try to understand why things happen the way they do, but sometimes we need to accept that we cannot fully comprehend everything. Instead of questioning God's justice, we should trust in his wisdom and acknowledge that his ways are higher than ours. Moreover, Elihu's words also remind us that our actions have consequences, both good and bad. While suffering is not always a result of our sin, sometimes it is a natural consequence of our choices. Elihu encourages Job to examine his own heart and repent of any sin he might have committed. Similarly, we too should regularly examine our own lives and confess any sins we might have committed to God, seeking his forgiveness and striving to live a righteous life. In conclusion, Job chapter 35 provides us with a reminder that God's ways are higher than our ways and that his justice is perfect, even if we cannot fully understand it. Elihu's words also encourage us to examine our own lives and confess any sins we might have committed, striving to live a righteous life before God. May we learn from Elihu's wisdom and trust in God's perfect justice, even when we cannot fully comprehend it. Thank you for visiting us today. Please share with us your favorite Bible chapter below in the comments section. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really does help our channel grow. Looking forward to see you back here for our next video. Always take good care.